It is another flight, another warm afternoon in Pakistan. Passengers board calmly at Allama Iqbal International Airport in Lahore. For most on board, it is just a short, familiar journey. Flight PK-8303 is heading to Karachi, a routine trip of under 2 hours. The aircraft is one of the world's most common and trusted domestic passenger planes. The pilots are experienced. The weather looks good. Everything appears normal, but it will not stay that way. In the skies above Pakistan, this flight is about to enter a chain of confusion, misjudgment, and tragedy. As the aircraft approaches its destination, something begins to go wrong. Terribly wrong. No one sees it coming. But this ordinary flight will become one of Pakistan's deadliest aviation disasters. So what happened to Flight 8303? Was it a pilot error, a system failure? Why did no alarm stop what was coming? And could anyone have survived what followed? This is the true story of Pakistan International Airlines Flight 8303. It is Friday, the 22nd of May, 2020. At Allama Iqbal International Airport in Lahore, the day begins like any other. The terminal is busy, but not chaotic. People move through security, carry-on bags in hand, checking their phones and boarding passes. Some are tired, some are excited, most are just glad to be flying again. After weeks of lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic, domestic flights have only just resumed. People are heading home for Eid, one of the most important holidays of the year. There's a quiet sense of relief and celebration. Waiting on the runway is Pakistan International Airlines Flight 8303. The aircraft is an Airbus A320. It's a model used by airlines all over the world, known for its reliability and efficiency. This particular aircraft was built in 2004. Because of the global COVID-19 pandemic, the plane had been grounded from late March to early May, just like many others. But since May 7th, it had been back in the air, flying short domestic routes. In fact, the day before this flight, it had completed a trip from Muscat, Oman back to Lahore with no reported issues. On board today are 99 people, 91 passengers and 8 crew members. Some are traveling with children, some are students returning home. Others are simply excited to reunite with loved ones after weeks apart. In the cockpit are 2 experienced pilots. Captain Sajjad Gul has flown for years, over 17,000 hours in the air. His co-pilot, Usman Azam, also has a solid record. Between them, they've handled countless flights just like this one. As the boarding doors close, the crew finishes their final checks. Nothing out of the ordinary. However, something is on its way. Nobody knows that in less than an hour, this flight will be in danger. At exactly 5 minutes past 1 in the afternoon, Pakistan International Airlines Flight 8303 lifts off from Lahore. The plane climbs smoothly into the sky and reaches its normal flying height of 34,000 feet. There is nothing unusual, just a routine flight. As the plane flies past the city of Nawabshah around 2:15 p.m., the pilots are told to begin descending. They start bringing the plane down to 10,000 feet. And then a few minutes later, they set it to descend even lower, to 5,000 feet. The plane begins dropping faster, but then a problem happens. The pilots are told to switch to a new radio frequency to talk to Karachi approach, but they accidentally tune into the wrong one. For about a minute, air traffic control can't talk to them. Even other planes try calling them, but there's no reply. Finally, the pilots hear a call on an emergency channel. They respond and switch to the correct frequency. Contact with Karachi is restored, but during that silence, the plane has continued descending, and they've lost time. At 2:25 p.m., Karachi gives them permission to descend further, to 3,000 feet, and land using the ILS system. But now the plane is still over 15,000 feet high and getting close to the airport. They're too high and too close to land safely. To try to slow down, the pilots use speed brakes and panels that pop out to add drag, but they are still flying too fast, above the speed limit for planes flying at lower altitudes. They're supposed to be under 250 knots, but they're going over 255. Air traffic control sees the problem and asks if they are comfortable with this descent, and Captain replies saying yes. But in reality, the situation is not safe. At this point, they try to lower the landing gear, even though it's too early. This adds more drag and makes the plane descend even faster. The plane dives steeply, over 7,000 feet per minute. Still, the pilots say they are comfortable. "We can make it, inshallah," the co-pilot tells air traffic control. In the cockpit, the captain says something surprising. He will be surprised by what we have done. He's talking about the air traffic controllers. almost proud that they are attempting a landing from such a high and fast descent. Air traffic control tells them to turn away for a safer approach, but the pilots don't listen. But they are not at the right height or speed. The plane is now just 5 miles from the runway, still too fast and too steep. The computer systems start to warn the pilots to pull up. First Officer Azam responds. He pulls back slightly, raises the gear, and retracts the speed brakes, but doesn't inform Captain Gul. He also extends the flaps, which helps slow the plane, but they're moving too fast for safe deployment. More warnings follow. Azam suggests a go-around. Gul, now assertive, replies, no, leave it, and takes control of the plane, even though he's supposed to just monitor. This creates more confusion. Both pilots are now moving the controls at the same time. That's dangerous. At 2:34 p.m., the plane is seconds from touchdown, and the plane approaches runway 25L. There's a critical problem. The landing gear is not down. No one on the ground knows, not the tower, not the passengers. At 2:34, the aircraft contacts the runway surface with its belly and engines, which scrape and spark as they drag along the concrete nearly 4,500 feet from the runway threshold. Inside the cockpit, the pilots react differently. The captain pushes the nose down, while the first officer instinctively pulls back, resulting in an unstable nose-down pitch of about 4 degrees. The brakes engage, but without wheels on the ground, their effectiveness is limited. The impact causes severe vibrations. Engine fire warnings activate, and electrical systems begin to fail. One engine's fire alarm illuminates, while the other engine loses power. Recognizing the damage, the first officer urgently calls for a go-around. 14 seconds after the initial belly strike, the thrust levers are pushed forward to full power, and despite heavy damage and asymmetric thrust, the aircraft lifts off again at 2:34:45. At barely 58 feet above the runway, a warning sounds indicating the gear is still not down. The crew attempts to extend and retract the landing gear, but it is unclear if the mechanisms respond due to damage. They radio the tower to request permission for another approach. As they climb and turn for their final attempt, both engines are leaking oil, damaged badly from the runway scrape. Oil pressure drops drastically in both engines. Warning lights flash all over the cockpit as the engines start failing one by one. At 2:36, one engine shuts down. Then confusion causes the other engine to lose power too. Electrical failures follow. The cockpit goes dark as the black boxes stop recording. Only a small emergency fan deploys to keep minimal systems running. The plane begins to lose speed, and stall warnings blare. The pilots fight desperately to keep control and maintain speed. They manage to restart one engine briefly, but it doesn't last. The second engine fails again. The plane is now powerless, gliding silently over Karachi's crowded neighborhoods. At 1,500 feet, the tower checks in, and the pilots confirm they've lost both engines. When asked if they plan to do a belly landing, they say no. They're trying to land wherever they can. Below 700 feet, they finally lower the landing gear and tell the cabin crew to prepare for an emergency landing. At 2:39 minutes and 46 seconds, the captain calls a Mayday, but forgets to transmit it properly. The first officer steps in and sends the emergency call. Just seconds later, at 2:40, the plane crashes into a dense residential neighborhood about 4,400 feet from the runway. The plane hits a mobile tower, crashes through streets and houses, and erupts in a massive fireball. Wreckage litters the road and buildings, and the fire spreads quickly. The moment the plane crashes, the airport declares a full-scale emergency. Within minutes, fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue teams rush toward the wreckage. However, the narrow, winding streets of the neighborhood slow them down, making it hard to reach the disaster site quickly. Soldiers from the Pakistani Army and Rangers arrive soon after, setting up a secure perimeter around the chaos. Rescue workers push through piles of rubble, desperately trying to reach survivors and pull people out of the wreckage. The crash destroys several homes, turning familiar streets into scenes of destruction. Hospitals across Karachi go on high alert. Doctors and nurses brace themselves for an influx of injured victims. Even with the COVID-19 pandemic still challenging the city, medical teams rally to respond. As officials begin counting the toll, it becomes clear that 97 people on board lost their lives, including well-known figures like Zara Abid and 5 Pakistani army officers. Miraculously, 2 passengers survive the horror and are rushed to nearby hospitals where they remain stable. Right after the crash, the investigation kicks into high gear. Pakistan's Aircraft Accident Investigation Board, or AAIB, takes the lead. They recover the plane's black boxes and ship them off to France for deep analysis. What they find starts to paint a troubling picture. The flight crew had clear warnings that they were supposed to enter a holding pattern to safely lose altitude. These signals showed up on multiple instruments, but somehow the pilots completely missed them. Digging deeper, the investigators uncover a string of mistakes and risky behaviors. During the cruise, the pilots were chatting casually about COVID-19 and other unrelated things, breaking the sterile cockpit rule. It is a strict regulation that bans any non-essential talk below 10,000 feet. Because of this distraction, they never properly prepared for their approach. The pilots also ignored key instructions from air traffic control. When told to circle and lose altitude, they brushed it off and pressed ahead with an unstable, risky approach. As the plane descends, things only get worse. The autopilot disconnects amid dangerous nose-down angles, but the crew doesn't communicate properly. Alarms sound off, but no one calls out what's happening or who's flying the plane. Critical procedures to avoid crashing into terrain are ignored. When the first officer raised the landing gear and speed brakes, he didn't inform the captain. The captain stays focused on landing no matter what, ignoring warnings that the landing gear isn't down. They never call out their positions or decisions, breaking basic safety teamwork. Even the final moments on the runway show bad decisions. The pilots use full reverse thrust while still in the air, against every rule, and then attempt a go-around after the engines have been damaged, which is forbidden. Instead of stopping safely, they try to take off again, but it's too late. The investigation also reveals problems with the pilots themselves. The captain, Gul, had a history of flying too many hours and showed signs of poor judgment, overconfidence, and low stress tolerance. Psychologists described him as bossy and overbearing, with a troubling lack of technical awareness. The first officer, Azam, also struggled with some training and supervision issues. There's another factor. The crash happened during Ramadan, when Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset. The investigators studied whether fasting affected the pilot's performance. Simulator tests showed that dehydration and low blood sugar can seriously impair a pilot's ability to fly. The pilots refused snacks offered mid-flight, so it's very likely they were fasting, and their judgment may have been clouded. Meanwhile, air traffic control wasn't perfect either. Though they tried to instruct the plane to circle and lose altitude, the crew ignored those commands. The controllers also failed to confirm the landing gear status clearly once the plane was on the runway, a crucial missed step. This tragic accident reminds us how many things have to go right in aviation and how devastating it can be when they don't. Thanks for watching. What do you think was the biggest factor in this crash? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any future videos where we break down real-life aviation stories and investigations. See you in the next one.